of Education for November 2nd, 2021 is called to order. For tonight's meeting, any item that will be voted on has been posted to the PPS website under the Board and Meetings tab. The meeting is being streamed live on PPS TV Services website and on Channel 28 and will be replayed throughout the next 2 weeks. Please check the district website for replay times. Good evening, everyone. I want to welcome the board, the superintendent, staff, families, students, and guests. Our first order of business is a resolution proclaiming the celebration of National Native American Indian Heritage Month in Portland Public Schools. The racial equity and social justice work we are engaged in aims to recognize, elevate, and celebrate the contributions of all of our students, but particularly our Black, Indigenous, and other students of color. Today, we are uplifting and celebrating National Native American Indian Heritage Month. And later in the month, I hope to hear directly from Native American students about their experiences and dreams and hopes. I'd like to ask Director Green to read this resolution now, if you would, Director.
I would. Resolution proclaiming the celebration of National Native American Indian Heritage Month in Portland Public Schools. Native American Indians are descendants of the original indigenous inhabitants of what is now the United States. The Portland metro region rests on the traditional lands of the bands of the Chinook, Multnomah, Clackamas, Tualatin, Malala, Kalapayu, Waska, Cowlitz, and Cathlamet tribes. These tribes established their communities in a resource-rich area where they traded and fished along the rivers and harvested those natural resources that fed and maintained their families. In the 1950s, under the federal relocation policy, a large segment of the native population in the US was forced to relocate to several major cities, of which Portland was one. This has added to the diversity of tribal representation in the region. Portland boasts one of the largest and most diverse urban Native American populations in the US. The history of Native American Indians is rich with those who positively influence and enrich our nation, our society, our region, our state, and our schools through their entrepreneurship, commitment to community service, deep value of justice and liberty, and social and cultural life. On August 3rd, 1990, President of the United States, George H.W. Bush, declared the month of November as National American Indian Heritage Month, thereafter commonly referred to as Native American Heritage Month. Native American Indians have made profound contributions and continue to make advances in education, medicine, art, culture, and public service, and been a consistent and vital influence in our nation's growth and prosperity. The Portland Metro's Native American Indian community is diverse and growing, with the population estimated to be nearly 70,000. As Portland is a relocation site, PPS students represent more than 150 tribal nations. As such, we are humbled by Native American Indian employee, families, and communities' contribution to the accomplishment of PPS's mission. Understanding Native American Indian history is an important part of celebrating Native American Heritage Month. The Oregon Indian Education Association introduced Oregon Governor Brown, and Oregon Governor Brown signed into law Senate Bill 13, Tribal History, Shared History, in the 2017 legislative session. This bill called upon the Oregon Department of Education, or ODE, to develop a statewide curriculum related to the Native American experience in Oregon, including tribal history, tribal sovereignty, culture, treaty rights, government, socioeconomic experiences, and current events. Tribal history, or shared history, is one of 11 objectives identified in ODE's American Indian Alaska Native State Plan, in which, quote, every school district in Oregon implements historical, accurate, culturally embedded, place-based, contemporary, and developmentally appropriate American Indian curriculum, end quote. Oregon is one of several states adopting similar efforts to reaffirm the state's commitment in preserving tribal cultural integrity and the education of our citizens. In May 2018, ODE facilitated coordination of the creation of essential understandings of Oregon's American Indians, which has been used to develop American Indian curriculum and assessment tools for 4th, 8th, and 10th grades, aligning with state standards in the following content areas: English language arts, science, math, social science, and political education/health. Portland Public Schools Office of Indian Education, Office of Teaching and Learning, and Office of Schools are engaged in this vital statewide work. As of January 2020, the state of Oregon requires implementation of tribal history or shared history with all K-12 school districts throughout the state. The Office of Schools and Office of Teaching and Learning are working together to support the implementation of this curriculum as a foundational and fundamental element of our culturally responsive teaching and learning for the students of Portland Public Schools. Portland Public Schools has a racial education equity policy that states our commitment to affirmatively overcome the educational barriers that have resulted in a persistent, unacceptable achievement gap for Black and Native students, and to give each student the opportunity and support to meet his or her highest potential. Closing opportunity gaps while raising achievement for all students is the top priority of the Board of Education, the superintendent, and all district staff. The Portland Public Schools Board of Education believes each and every student is to be celebrated and appreciated for the distinct and vibrant contributions made by sharing cultures, language, ideas, beliefs, and values within a school community. And tonight we are celebrating Native American students. So we've resolved that the Portland Public Schools Board of Education hereby promotes November 1 through November 30th as Native American Indian Heritage Month, and encourages staff, students, and community to observe, recognize, and celebrate the culture, heritage, and economic contributions of Native Americans to our Oregon and the United States through culturally relevant activity, and to learn from the past and understand the experiences that have shaped the United States. The superintendent or his designee shall work with all schools in the district to recognize Native American Indian Heritage Month through culturally relevant lessons and activities. And I close.
Thank you, Director Green. Do I have a motion and a second to adopt Resolution 6391, the resolution proclaiming the celebration of National Native American Indian Heritage Month in Portland Public Schools?
So moved.
Second.
Director Brem Edwards moves and Director Hollins seconds. Is there any board discussion? Ms. Bradshaw, is there any public comment?
No.
The board will now vote on Resolution 6391, resolution proclaiming the celebration of National Native American Indian Heritage Month in Portland Public Schools. All in favor, please indicate by saying yes.
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 All opposed, please indicate by saying no. Are there any abstentions? Resolution 6391 is approved by a vote of 7-0, with Student Representative Weinberg unofficially voting.
Yes.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. And I think I forgot to vote, but I'm also in favor. So I'm including myself in the 7 unanimous. Our next item is a resolution to recognize November 1st through 11th, 2021 as National School Psychology Week. We're recognizing this week as National School Psychology Week. And I know the mental health and well-being of our communities are important to Student Representative Weinberg. Student Representative Weinberg, would you like to introduce the next item?
For sure. Thank you.
So school psychologists play an important role in our overall supports of students' mental health needs. They not only care for students' social, behavioral, and emotional needs, but also utilize their skills in the field of psychology to help students in their academic needs as well. So implementing plans, goals, strategies to help students achieve higher academic excellence within our school system. I'm also happy that PPS in the past years have utilized SIA funding and our general fund to increase the FTE of school psychologists within PPS, and also targeted the use of our school psychologists to TSI schools where our students need the most support from school psychologists. And Chair DePass, do you want me to read the resolution as well?
Please. And thank you. I forgot to request that earlier.
Sounds good. Resolution number 6392, resolution to recognize November 1st through 11th, 2021 as National School Psychology Week. School psychologists work to ensure the protection of the education rights, opportunities, and well-beings of all of our children, especially those whose voices have been muted, identities obscured, or needs ignored. National Association of School Psychologists, NASP, Board of Directors, April 2017. School psychologists in Portland Public Schools are essentially skilled in the provision of school-based mental and behavioral health, multi-tiered systems of support that meet the academic and social emotional needs of all students, and services for students with disabilities that ensure equitable educational access and are consistent with special education law. School districts and local education agencies should continue to work with school psychologists to implement National Association of School Psychologists organizational principles that facilitate school psychologists' engagement in all tiers of multi-tiered systems of support in partnership with school teams, teachers, students, families, and community partners to ensure that student supports, programs, learning strategies, and educational decisions prepare students to realize the graduate portrait and lead a more socially just world. Resolution. The Board of Education of Portland Public Schools extends greetings and best wishes to all observing November 1st through 11th, 2021 as National School Psychology Week.
Thank you, Student Representative Weinberg. Guadalupe, would you like to, I'm sorry, Superintendent Guerrero, would you like to introduce our next speaker?
Thank you, Chair. I'd also like to invite in from the virtual green room our Chief of Student Supports, Brenda Martinick, to offer a little more testimony and speak further about the critically important role that school psychologists play here at PPS. Brenda?
Thank you, Superintendent. Good evening, Chair DePass, School Board, Student Representative Weinberg, staff, and our families in our community. I think that this is a great opportunity for us to highlight some amazing work that our school psychologists do on a daily basis. We currently have 56 school psychologists in our special education department, and we have done a great job with our SIA funds to increase and add 5 comprehensive school psychologists. Those school psychologists have been serving in our comprehensive schools. And so what we've been doing is we increase them to full-time support so that they are not only working to support our students with special needs, but they're also working in all of our tiered supports. They work with our mental health needs, behavioral health. They also do behavioral assessments and then help staff and students and families to really be able to wrap around students who are in need of that support. And so we are very thankful to our staff and to all of those who circle around our children and our families. And so thank you very much.
Thank you so much for your comments. Do I have a motion and a second to adopt Resolution 6392, the resolution to recognize November 1st to 11th as National School Psychology Week?
So moved.
Second.
Second. Director Lowry moves. Directors Brim Edwards and Constam second, if I got that right. Just one comment, it's November 1st to 11th, which is actually 2 weeks, almost, it's 9 days or something. So I'm just a note that it's actually longer than a week. Is there any board discussion on the resolution? Ms. Bradshaw?
I just want to express some gratitude again to our school psychologists. I think in every single one of my school visits this year, staff have mentioned just the experience of responding to collective grief and trauma of the pandemic with students. And all of our staff are bearing that, but our school psychologists are really on the front line with so many children who've lost family members or who've suffered in different ways through isolation. So I think, you know, we're in a different time, and I want to just recognize deeply my appreciation for our school psychologists and everyone responding to the emotional needs of our students.
Thank you. The board will now vote on resolution 6392. Director Lowry, did you have a comment?
No.
Okay. I want to, before we vote, would like to give appreciation to Director Lowry for doing this virtually all last year. I have a new appreciation for your skill set.
It was fairly challenging. So I'm sorry that you're having to do this tonight, but you're doing a great job.
Thank you. And so we'll now vote on resolution 6392, resolution to recognize November 1st through 11th as National School Psychology Week. The Board of Education of Portland Public Schools extends greetings and best wishes to all observing November 1st through 11th, 2021 as National School Psychology Week Plus. All in favor, please indicate by saying yes.
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 All opposed, please indicate by saying no. Are there any abstentions? Resolution 6392 is approved by a vote of 7-0 with Student Representative Weinberg unofficially voting
Yes.
Thank you. Next, the board will vote on the consent agenda. Board members, if there are any items you'd like to pull for discussion at this time, we'll set those aside for discussion and vote at the end of the meeting. Ms. Bradshaw, are there any changes to the consent agenda?
No.
And board members, are there any items you'd like to pull from the consent agenda? Do I have a motion and a second to adopt the consent agenda?
So moved.
Second.
Director Brim Edwards moves and Director Constam seconds the adoption of the consent agenda. Is there any?
I'm sorry, Chair to pass. I'm sorry to break in. I just want to make sure that we've got the right numbering here. I'm reading, and it looks like through resolution 6400, but I don't think 6400 is on the consent agenda. Am I wrong about that?
I believe you're actually right about that. That is a separate resolution that is not on the consent agenda. So that would mean our numbering would go through 6393 through 6399. Great catch. The board will now vote on resolution 6393 through 6399. All in favor, please indicate by saying yes.
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 Yes. All opposed, please indicate by saying no. And are there any abstentions?
No, but I didn't vote. I'm a yes.
The consent agenda is approved by a vote of 7-0 with Student Representative Weinberg unofficially voting
Yes.
We now turn to student and public comment. Before we begin, I would like to review our guidelines for public comment. First, the board thanks you for taking the time to attend the meeting and providing your comments. Public input informs and improves our work, and we look forward to hearing your thoughts, reflections, and concerns. Our responsibility as a board is to actively listen, and to that end, I would ask each of you to tuck your phone away during testimony so we can give our full attention to the people in front of us. Our board office may follow up on board-related issues that are raised during public testimony. We request that Complaints about individual employees be directed to the superintendent's office as a personnel matter. And if you have additional materials or items you would like to provide to the board or superintendent, we ask that you email them to public comment, all one word, at pps.net. That's public comment at pps.net. Please make sure when you begin your comment that you clearly state your name and spell your last name. You'll have 3 minutes to speak, and you'll hear a sound after 3 minutes, which means it's time to conclude your comments. Ms. Bradshaw, do we have anyone signed up for student or public comment?
We do. We have Xander Levine.
Okay,
Hello. Can everyone hear me?
we can hear you. Thank you.
Awesome. Good evening, board members. It's great to be back here tonight. Although virtual, I'm still happy I'm able to provide comment, especially after what we witnessed last week. I was there in the front row when the chaos erupted. It was disappointing to watch, but I'm glad you all are safe and we're able to continue. I was there with other students who all support a vaccine mandate. Let me be clear. I'm not scared about what happened last week. If this meeting was in person, I'd be speaking in person. I cannot afford to be scared because I, just like the other 50,000 PPS students, have to go back to school tomorrow, hoping we don't contract COVID. If anything, I'm scared not to be here. It's scary to think that the loudest voices seem to be the ones who aren't even in the district. It's scary to think that you won't start listening to the voices of students because so far you've only seemed to care what parents have to say. Not a single one of you besides the superintendent showed up to the student town hall about vaccinations, which, let me point out, every single student there besides one supported a mandate. I've said it before and I'll say it again. You need to focus students in your discussion and how this would make schools safer for all students who have to go to them all day. We're the ones sitting in class all day, walking through crowded hallways, and now, because of the rain, forced to eat lunch inside or lunch outside when it's raining. Your goal is to center students, so show us. Show me with action, because of right now, that's not happening. You need to continue, or you continue to talk about the opinions of parents, but haven't spoken much at all about the opinions of students. Students want a vaccine mandate. They're showing it loud and clear. Nearly 400 students at Grant walked out last week. Your own data shows that a majority of people who voice their concern or their thoughts on the issue support a vaccine mandate. And my own Instagram poll, as silly as it may be, showed me that 97% of the people who responded to my poll want a vaccine mandate. A vaccine mandate would keep us safer. A vaccine mandate would protect the most vulnerable. Listen to the students, center students in your discussion, and vote yes on a vaccine mandate. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for your comments.
Thanks, Xander.
Thank you. We have Rachel O'Rourke on her way over now.
Sorry, guys, it muted me automatically. Hi, my name is Rachel O'Rourke, O''Rourke, and I have 3 kids in PPS. I'd also like to mention that I'm a registered independent who has historically voted left, and I am not anti-vaccine. Data released Friday from the CDC showed that between December 2020 and October 2021, over 837,000 adverse events following COVID vaccines were reported to the Vaccine Adverse Event Reporting System, VAERS. Out of these numbers, 22,000 came from kids 12 to 17 years old, including just over 1,300 that were rated as serious and 25 deaths. Now, depending on where your bias lies, you might have tuned out the minute that I said VAERS, because some people don't believe that that data is accurate. And truth be told, it's not accurate. Historically, only 1 to 13% of actual incidents are reported to the system. So those numbers are likely to be much, much higher. Even without data from VAERS, injured support groups are growing. Members from these groups run into the tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands. I have seen testimonies from young, old, left, right, every race, every background. So you might be thinking that the reward of getting the vaccine is worth the risk of getting injured. So let's dig into that for just a minute. While children do get infected, their risk for a COVID death is minuscule, lower than their already low risk of dying from the flu. So the reward of the actual child should not be a mandate. Now, you might say that the reward is that vaccinated children reduce transmission. It has already been proven that the vaccinated can still transmit the virus, as seen in countries such as Israel, who have one of the highest vaccination rates and also concurrently some of the highest rates of COVID. My son, who recently got COVID, contracted it from football. The vast majority of those on his team who got infected were fully vaccinated. Now, a message directly to the school board. Until we appropriately care for those who are already injured and acknowledge the full scope of injuries that are happening to adults and kids who have already gotten vaccinated, please do not mandate this for our children. You have a very clear responsibility to appropriately assess the risks and benefits of these vaccines. I'd like you to think about this for just a moment. If you choose to mandate this vaccine, many parents are going to feel forced to get the shot for their child. If and when one of those children gets injured, ask yourself if you're going to be able to live with yourself knowing that you could have prevented that from happening, because that blood is going to be on your hands. A message to the parents watching right now. If you decide to look at this data and decide that the reward of getting vaccinated is worth the risk of the potential injury for your child, then that's your decision to make. If you're a parent and you look at the data and decide that the risk just isn't worth it, that should be your decision to make as well. Stand up and fight for your right, please. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. We have Aaron Savage.
Hello, everyone. My name is Erin Savage, S-A-V-A-G-E. I'm a PPS parent and a PPS teacher of 17 years. I had to leave the profession due to the distress that this put on my soul. I was 40 years old and realized that my income would never be more than it was, as I had topped out on both experience and education. I watched class sizes rise, my administrator failed to support my classroom, kids' behaviors become outright violent, but the breaking point was regularly facing my students, seeing their educational needs, their psychosocial needs, or even just their need for food, and knowing that I alone could not provide that I had 156 other kids, all with their own unmet needs. With the moral injury of looking at a child in the eye, knowing that my best was no longer enough, I quit my job. This year looks like business as usual, but with masks. Meanwhile, teachers are donating weekends to cut yoga mats to figure out safer lunches, taking their prep time to cover for colleagues due to sub shortages, shortening their lunches themselves to restuff disinfecting wipe tubs or sweep their classrooms because custodians are stretched too thin, gathering snacks because nutrition workers or fresh food does not show up, or writing sub-plans as they are forced to quarantine due to their own symptomatic exposures and burning through their much-needed sick days. You should have seen this coming. Teachers don't need professional development, they need time. You cannot develop professionally if you are drowning. Maybe this was the year not to have any new adoptions. It's lovely to entice new subs, but it becomes irrelevant if you cannot retain your own teachers. Please consider this as you enter contract negotiations this year. Mr. Guerrero, I think you would look awesome driving a bus. Our cluster buses are canceled multiple times a week. Mr. Bird, they've revoked needing a teaching license to sub. I am sure your help could be used there. Board members, now that I am unemployed, I am using my time for lunch duty at my kids' school, and I'd love to have you join me to see the X's that are incorrectly measured at less than 3 feet apart become irrelevant if a child's skills do not allow them to remain seated in their X for the 30-minute lunch. The lens of the rest of this year needs to ask acutely right now, is what we're doing supporting teachers? And if not, scrap it. One of my daughters is in 2nd grade. They have never had an uninterrupted school year. Every 2nd grade classroom in this district should have been given an EA to expedite catching these kids up. Research shows that not being a reader by 3rd grade has lasting impacts on their future education. Now is the time to help her teacher mitigate that. Spend what you need to offer competitive wages to all support staff. Jump in yourselves. If someone is having a heart attack, you don't provide a training on how to help their blood pressure. You give them an aspirin and you rush them to the ER. Listen to what teachers are telling you. This situation is acute. Their hearts are giving up. I am testifying tonight to share that these are not empty threats. You have already lost me, But please, for my daughter's current and future teachers, for all of my colleagues out there showing up every day, please listen to them. Because ultimately, if you cannot support teachers, you are also failing our kids. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Stephanie Miller.
Hi, so Stephanie had a family emergency tonight and she asked me to step in for her. My name is Heather Bowden, Bowden. I'm also a PPS parent. I have some thoughts on last week's discussion by this board on the vaccine mandates. Director Scott said he was an institution guy. So I have two quotes for him from doctors on the FDA's advisory panel for COVID vaccines. Dr. James Hildreth said, "This is a really tough one. I do believe children at highest risk do need to be vaccinated, but vaccinating all children to achieve that seems a bit much to me." Dr. Eric Rubin, also editor of the New England Journal of Medicine, said, "We're never going to learn how safe this vaccine is until we start giving it. That's just the way it goes." And speaking of safety, I heard not one bit of discussion on whether or not the vaccine was safe for all kids. After all, if there is a risk, there must be a choice. A recent study shows that boys aged 12 to 15 with no underlying medical conditions are 4 to 6 times more likely to be diagnosed with vaccine-related myocarditis than ending up in the hospital with COVID, with 86% of those cases requiring hospital care. I actually didn't hear much discussion in the way of data or science at all. The one and only study cited was from Sweden, showing that vaccines reduce transmission. The problem with this study is that the index date for those cases was April 14th, 2021, before Delta was widely circulating. And we all know this vaccine was not designed for Delta. There was a study just published in The Lancet that did include Delta transmission and found that fully vaccinated cases have a peak viral load similar to those unvaccinated and do efficiently transmit infection in household settings, including to vaccinated contacts. This is in direct opposition to Director Constam's claim that the viral load is lower in vaccinated people. It also found infection rates among household contacts exposed to those fully vaccinated was similar to those exposed to the unvaccinated, 25 to 23%. The rate of infections that occurred in vaccinated people was basically the same rate of infections for the unvaccinated, 38 to 41%. But the most troubling thing I heard was when Chair DePass had the audacity to say that those of us that threatened to unenroll our children was, and I quote, "suggesting a level of privilege to have the choice to just say, if you do this, I'm pulling my child." Make no mistake, this is not a privilege. This is a serious hardship. Private school tuition would put a huge financial strain on our family. Homeschooling my ADHD son without the supports he receives at school would be beyond difficult. Understand that the parents who have to make this heartbreaking decision are not zealots, as Chair DePass referred to us as. We are sincerely opposed to giving our children a vaccine with a mechanism of action that is different than any other vaccine ever made, has never been deployed in humans before, and has zero long-term safety data in order to reduce our child's risk of COVID from almost zero to almost zero. All current school vaccines have been fully approved by the FDA for at least 10 years before being mandated. You are a school board, you are not a board of health. You are not doctors, and you have no business when it comes to making health decisions that should be made by parents and their children's doctors. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Sorry. Eric Turley is on his way over.
Mr. Turley,
Can you hear me?
we can hear you.
Oh, good evening. I come to you today as a lifelong believer in the power of science and progress. In the name of creating a better world for us all, and especially for our children, I come to you today doubly vaccinated by Pfizer because I want to believe these vaccines are making a difference. And I want to believe that the companies producing these vaccines are doing so with their conscience intact, that they're motivated solely for the betterment of our collective health and well-being, and certainly not for greed. Though unfortunately, based on what we're currently witnessing, I don't know how we can possibly come to these conclusions. Instead, we have a vaccine with a rapidly declining efficacy, zero long-term testing, and of course, record profits for the companies administering them. Indeed, science would be truly ashamed. And indeed, the companies we're letting be our saviors here have continually demonstrated a complete lack of judgment and disgusting business practices over the years. As someone that's seen firsthand the terrible effects of the opioid epidemic, the companies that have enabled this have a lot to answer for, and that's you, Johnson & Johnson. And what about the countless other families adversely affected by intentionally deceptive marketing practices in which kickbacks were provided to doctors to dangerously sell drugs for off-label use? That's you, Pfizer and Moderna. Someone guilty of manslaughter would have to answer for everything, and their punishment would be hard time in state or federal prison. And I guess it's their fault for not being able to hide behind a corporate label, or their fault they don't have millions of dollars to throw at an army of lawyers for their defense. What these companies have done is arguably much worse. They just destroyed far more lives, and in return, they receive an inadequate fine, record profits, and a complete lack of accountability. So much so that they're practically being able to repeat their behavior again and again. God forbid they decide to use that money to help the families their greed has destroyed. Indeed, they have a lot to answer for. And here we are, about ready to vaccinate our children with these criminals' product, because that's what they are, actual criminals, and we're being asked to trust them with our children's lives. Why haven't there been investigations into that which led to these negligent decisions? How can we be sure that the same decisions which were made back then aren't being made now? Are we truly going to ignore the previous criminal behavior when it comes to our children's lives? At this point, it's not about the science. I believe in science, as I said, and I truly believe an effective vaccine can be made by the right entity, the right technology, the right array of testing, and most of all, the right guiding principles to do no harm for the betterment of society. You know, a place you'd expect Jean-Luc Picard at the helm, but it's not them. It's not Moderna, not Johnson & Johnson, and certainly not Pfizer, because as far as I can tell, they've all been littered with Ferengi or a bunch of Mr. Krabs clones, because therefore, I can't in good conscience endorse a vaccine for our children from entities that put profits before true science, and especially with the survival rate as high as it is. So who remembers the Iraq? Thanks. That's about it.
Thank you.
Thank you. We have Jamie Ackerman Harvey.
Hi, thank you, members of the board, for providing me the opportunity to speak today. My name is Jamie Ackerman Harvey, ACKERMAN-HARVIE. I use she, her pronouns. I'm here tonight to change the topic a little bit and talk about the Southeast enrollment and program balancing process. My family is a part of the Atkinson's school community. I specifically want to come and talk about the fact that phase 2 process has mandated that the dual language immersion programs change to a whole school model as a non-negotiable aspect of decision making. This is something that changed between phase 1 and phase 2 and is a fundamental change to the language immersion programs throughout the district. I'm concerned that the whole school mandate is being used to prevent communities from meaningfully engaging in the process or for advocating for themselves. From my understanding, it was added as a criteria specifically without the involvement of the members of the Southeast Guiding Coalition who've been asked to represent language immersion communities, effectively limiting the scope of their input into the process. While the program balancing process has stated that it is meant to focus on equity, it appears that time and time again, it sidelines or dismisses the input of stakeholders of color. What I heard listening to Latinx engagement sessions throughout phase 1 is that consolidating Spanish immersion programs is segregation. Also, that offering fewer program sites provides less access for many Spanish-speaking families around the district and causes hardships on many that the program is meant to support. During the most recent Guiding Coalition meeting, Chinese immersion program representative Eddie Wang said that creating a DLI-only school would be culturally insensitive for a Chinese American community, for whom becoming a part of the broader community is very important. Language immersion programs are meant to support and uplift native-speaking communities, but instead, the district is paternalistically assuming that what's best for these communities is what's easiest administratively. Personally, I don't see how it's fair to ask communities to have nuanced conversations like how to develop culturally responsive programs within the current limited project timeframes and public engagement schedule, much less at the same time as talking about details like percentage utilizations. What I would like to see happen is that the mandates making DLI programs that say that they must be full school are immediately removed as decision-making criteria for the boundary process. and that PPS start a separate engagement process with emerging communities about the whole school model, specifically incorporating feedback from communities who speak those languages and dual language educators. I'd like to note that this could be a dual language advisory group, as was proposed by Michael Bacon in a letter in December 2020, but something that was never implemented. This engagement should happen in venues where people already are or feel comfortable engaging, and should place value on lived experience rather than dismissing it. If the feedback's complex, I hope that the district would lean into these conversations, take time to document and understand concerns and needs, and develop plans that are responsive and collaborative. Thank you for taking the time to listen to me, who feels that I have the privilege to speak at a meeting like this. And I hope that you will consider taking action to provide language immersion communities the voice they deserve to have. Thank you.
Thank you.
Sorry, I can't get there we go, timer to stop. We have Trenton Duval.
Hello, Trenton Duval.
Sorry, I believe I was muted. Yes, my name is Trenton Duval. The last name is D-U-V-A-L. I'm a parent at Atkinson Elementary, and I live in the neighborhood. Thank you for taking the time to listen. I wanted to share my personal experience with and opposition to consolidating the DLI schools into one so-called whole school. My children's previous school district, there was consolidation of the two-way immersion program into one school, and that school was promised resources to be able to better serve those students, since two-way immersion requires certain extra work, including translation across the board and specialized teacher training and classroom materials, just to name a few. However, that school was not given those additional resources. And so the end result was one school faced with all of the burdens of two-way immersion, but without a diverse neighborhood community to support them. I haven't heard a single parent in the DLI program say that they wanted to move or that they faced challenges in the co-located neighborhood school setting. So I would ask you reach out to members of the community that speak Spanish and other DLI languages, and that you listen to their desires for the programs that are supposed to serve them. I think it's presumptuous to believe that the success at Atkinson and other schools' DLI programs will transfer seamlessly to a consolidated school or a whole school method, given all the unknown factors of the community input in those programs in the successful schools. Furthermore, removing the DLI program creates more instability in a time of great uncertainty. I myself have one kid in the DLI program and another in the neighborhood program at Atkinson. And so we're faced with making a difficult decision about where to send our kids in the first year after returning from the intense disruption of the pandemic. I'm very disappointed that the only options presented to the community involve removing the DLI programs from neighborhood schools. It seems to be focused on easing the administrative burden without consideration of all the decisions that parents and teachers and staff have made to live close to their neighborhood schools and be part of those communities, and also without concern for the undue disruption in students' lives. So please keep the co-located DLI programs intact. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks. That concludes who have signed up for public comment.
Well, thank you all for your comments today. Again, your comments and testimony improve our work and our outcomes, and we appreciate that you took the time to show up this evening. Student representative, we're going to move into reports now. Student Representative Weinberg, would you please provide your report?
Good evening, everyone. At the last board meeting, kind of the general board consensus was we needed more student input. So to that end, I developed a survey with some partnership from the district student council to that end. And we actually ended up pushing it out yesterday night. So the survey incorporates demographic data. So including by cluster and also by racial demographic. Also includes whether that student is vaccinated or not, and then their opinions on implementing a vaccine mandate for students 12 and up. So far, we have roughly 300 responses so far. And I'm gonna share the QR code if it'll let me. Can you see it?
We cannot see a QR code. I can't see it. There it is.
There it is. We saw it briefly.
I clicked share and then it went away. What about now?
Yep, we can see it.
Okay. So I just wanted to make sure everyone's clear that this is specifically for students, not parents or teachers, school officials, anything like that. This is specifically for students. And through Google Forms, we were actually able to only allow for PPS emails to access the account. So unfortunately, we could have other PPS accounts access it, but hopefully only students will be using this survey. One of the questions is also, are you a high school student? Are you a middle school student or neither? To help weed out some of that data as well. At the November 16th, when it is next up for discussion, I'll present the data on this, including disaggregated data by race, cluster, and other questions that we asked in the survey, and also provide you with a recommendation from the District Student Council based on this data and what we are hearing from our community as well. In addition to that, I kind of also wanted to double tap on what public comment was on the Southeast Guiding Coalition. As someone who's been a part of a dual language immersion program for, oh goodness, 13 plus years, I guess. DLI is kind of super central to who I am as a student and who my community is at school. I think moving it to a whole school DLI program would be a great disservice to the students that we are trying to serve better. And specifically for Woodstock, moving CSS there would disrupt the neighborhood program in addition to the DLI program. So just wanted to put that out there. Also, just for the Southeast Guiding Coalition in general, I decided and other students decided as well this year to not participate. One, because of the huge time commitment it was to participate, and also because of the general hostility there was on that coalition towards BIPOC families and students in general. So I'm hoping we're doing better, but from what I've heard, we seem to be in the same cycle of not listening to BIPOC voices. Thank you.
Thank you for your update. We're going to cycle through because we're virtual. Do we have for board and committee and conference reports? I'll just cycle through the committees, and if you have an update, you can say I've got an update. So we'll start with, I guess it looks like it's alphabetical. The audit committee.
Oh, sorry about that. No update.
Thank you. The Charter and Alternative Programs, Director Green.
No update.
Intergovernmental, Director Lowry.
No update.
Policy, Director Brum Edwards.
I think there's a portion of the meeting tonight which will be the body of some of our most recent committee meeting work. So nothing in addition.
Thank you. Facilities and Operations, Director Hollins.
Yes. So we had our last meeting, which was a lively meeting. We discussed the process that the long-term facilities plan went through as far as how they got to their process. There was a presentation about the Albina Sports Complex, which I shared, which I'm thankful to have the opportunity to do that. And we had a public comment about the
ADA transition plan.
ADA, yes, thank you. ADA transition issues. And we also had a presentation about the real estate and dissolution of real estate property for the district. And that's all I'll report.
Thank you, Director Hollins. We'll move now to the annual update for the annual student investment account report to the community. Superintendent Guerrero, would you like to introduce this next item?
Yes, Chair DePass and directors. You'll recall in 2019, the Oregon legislature passed House Bill 3427, which created the Student Success Act, which is intended to invest $2 billion in Oregon education, public education, every 2 years. Of those funds, $500 million is expected to go to districts through the Student Investment Account, or the SIA, each year. Tonight, providing you with the annual report of our 3-year student investment account, our Chief Financial Officer, Norberto Delgadillo, and Chief of Schools, Dr. Schonberg.
Good evening. Thank you, Superintendent Guerrero. Good evening, Chair DePaz, Board Director, Student Representative Weinberg. I'll be here tonight along with Dr. Berg to share our Student Investment Account Year 1 annual report. And we recognize that we've provided you with critical information regarding the SI investments during our budget process. And again, our Year 2 plan was submitted back in June. So we've had some of these conversations, but there is this requirement that we need to come to you and share and present the annual report at a board meeting. Next slide. And so for tonight, really have 3 big key topics to talk through, essentially pass through memory lane, essentially where we've been, the road through what we've gone to. We'll touch on some of the strategic investments in Year 1, along with Year 1 highlights. Next slide, please. And first up, we'll talk about the guideposts and what we've been through. If we go on to the next slide, you can see that we began our SIA planning process in the fall of 2019. And soon after, we finalized PPS Reimagined and began prioritizing the system shifts. PPS ensured that the 3-year SIA plan was designed to accelerate our path towards achieving the graduate portrait. And since the plan was submitted in March 2020, we've continued to engage the community and shape our SIA investments to align with the strategic planning and reflect new learning. So on this slide, you see that trajectory over the course of the past few years. If we go on to the next slide, at the center of all of our work is a commitment to equity, with decisions informed through engagement that elevates voices of marginalized and vulnerable students. And that's encapsulated in the work we've done with the PPS Vision, Portland Public Schools Forward Together strategic plan, and ResJ Lens, all coming together, have provided the foundation to make some of the difficult decisions in the context we found ourselves over the past year, and particularly speaking about like the rapidly evolving COVID-19 environment. But keeping this in mind, they've grounded us in our approach to navigate changes and target resources that address immediate challenges, while continuing to build and improve district-wide systems and overall collective efficacy. And on the next slide, you can see that through our student investment account community engagement, which we began back in 2019, and some of the other broader engagements since then, our community continues to emphasize the importance of providing racially affirming and culturally responsive supports and services that are focused on social, emotional, mental, and behavioral health as well. And earlier today, Brenda was sharing with us the importance of the psychologists that have been added. So that's an example of some of the investments that have happened, along with academic supports and targeted interventions for our most vulnerable and underserved students. And despite significant state funding and reductions, so we have to go back to last year. So we're talking about last year, when in 2020, 2021, we had some reductions, we still maintained a focus and investment in these top priorities. We go to the next slide. Want to share a little bit about how some of these investments and priorities were incorporated into the past year in the work. If we go into the next slide, you do have a breakdown of the 2020-2021 SIA investments in your board packet, which is a lot more detailed than this. So really the following slides are to provide you with a high level of how we invested SIA funds and to support implementation, of Forward Together, our strategic plan, and really continuing to focus on SIA priorities. And when we first started planning, we came into the planning process with an anticipation of about $39 million in SIA. But then COVID started hitting the economy, started hitting across our communities and really impacting the work we were doing. And we had to reduce our plans. And essentially our $39 million SIA allocation was reduced to $12.4 million. But about $8.5 million of the general fund was reallocated to support continuing these investments and really help offset the impact. If you go to the next slide, here you can see how SIA funding continued to be prioritized for social, emotional, and mental health and academic supports, especially for historically underserved students. The general fund was prioritized for the RESJ partnership contracts that focused on providing culturally specific academic and social, emotional, mental health supports. And it was also used to preserve, the general fund was also used to preserve key investments such as targeted student services, curricular programming, the arts, middle school electives, and smaller class sizes. And I will share that as we've now entered this new biennium budget this school year, there is, with the restoration of the SIA grant, some of these investments that were originally funded with the general fund or this past year have shifted to SIA funding. And to put it in perspective, we went from last year with an SIA budget of about $12 million. This current year, our SIA budget is approximately $36 million. And the anticipation is that for next year, our SIA budget will be about $38 million. So we are getting back into a more fully funded model, which is exciting and gives us an opportunity to continue some of this great work. And with that in mind, on the next slide, I'd like to turn it over to Deputy Superintendent Bird, who can share some of the additional information about our programmatic investments.
All right, thanks, Norberto. And if you can just go to the next slide, we're going to share some highlights for this year and also some challenges. So we have made some key academic supports and targeted interventions for students using these dollars. And these are some of the highlights. So we have additional instructional specialists to provide targeted student supports in our CSI and title schools that helps offset some critical staffing shortages. We have visual and performing arts TOSAs that were created and help close the fine arts gap in the Jefferson and Roosevelt clusters. So we're creating a K-12 continuum for fine arts for students. We piloted new schedules in our middle schools to increase student opportunity for electives. That's been a big focus of ours as we think about how we can provide a better, more high quality experience to our middle school students. And then we have career teachers at alternative schools created adapted virtual and in-person personalized career learning opportunities. So next slide. One of the things we're most proud of is the work that we're doing with our racially and culturally specific partners. We really appreciate the work that our partners have done with us, and we have made some investments in this work. This is a key decision early on, was to use the general fund to maintain the key investments in the RESJ partnerships when the SIA funds were reduced. And again, we're just very appreciative of the contributions that these partners have made to our schools, particularly during the pandemic. So services are core to our efforts to provide a racially and culturally specific academic and wellness services for our BIPOC students. We have an observable shift towards closer and more integrated partnerships with schools. We've held quarterly partner meetings and had over 100 attendees. This is an opportunity for our principals and our partners to share best practices and also to sort of calibrate on how we can improve the services of our racially and culturally specific services with our schools. We have provided over 50,000 hours of direct service to students. And the PPS RESJ lens was continuously used to identify who to center in the engagement and involve in decision-making. We also piloted a community engagement and student voice framework to foster the overall goal of centering Black, Native, and students of color into the fabric of our everyday work here in the schools. Next slide. Another big focus of these dollars has been on social, emotional, and mental and behavioral health. So about half of our social workers hired by the Student Success and Health were educators of color. They've been implementing support such as affinity groups and drop-in office hours for staff well-being. We also have implemented a PPS student service provider framework to create a map for site-based support and to work coherently and efficiently together. The Student Success and Health educators are always assessing the needs of our students and connecting them with essential wellness services. So we've been able to use a lot of these funds to be able to provide wraparound services for our students and identify wraparound services for our students. And finally, student affinity groups have been central to the Naming and Defining Places initiative. This was designed to deepen leadership skills while elevating student voices to create more racially and culturally affirming spaces in our schools, student belonging. So those are the highlights, and now I want to just share with you a couple of the challenges that we faced. So next slide, please. Really, it's just the profound and disproportionate impact of the pandemic, the trauma associated with the pandemic, social unrest that we've been experiencing really required us to shift to meet the needs of our students, families, and educators in the midst of the crises that we have gone through. So in order to do that, we've had to cancel some or delay professional development due to staff shortages, as well as you remember last year we were pivoting from comprehensive distance learning to LIPI to hybrid, so we had to delay some things in order to make those shifts. We disrupted the distribution of supplies and resources, including art supplies, to schools due to the pandemic. We had some difficulty in reaching students. Again, this is where our culturally specific partners helped out a lot. But the difficulty of reaching students during the pandemic, the challenge of building relationships through Zoom, although as I've noted before, our teachers have done a great job of doing that and making connections with our students. Our RESJ partners had to also significantly adapt their services. So they're helping families with things that they don't normally do, like technical support and internet access. So they were again very helpful to us during this time. And so while there were some setbacks, additional SI funding and priorities also helped us make progress in the key areas that I mentioned before. And the next slide is the closeout. All right. So as we mentioned before, our first year has been limited, but it did allow us to better respond to the critical needs that arose from the compounding impacts of the pandemic. It's positioned us to better wrap around our students with critical services for recovery and better advance the outcomes established in the Forest Together strategic plan. We'll take your questions. Thank you.
Directors, do we have any questions for Dr. Bird?
I have one, Chair to pass.
Yeah.
So what is the expectation on student achievement do we hope to achieve with the additional investment from these dollars? That's one question. Second question is going to be my last question, is how many social workers is 50%?
I can get you the number of social workers. Actually, we have Leslie Odell's in the green room. If you can bring her over, she can answer that specific question. And your first question again, could you repeat? I'm sorry, you broke up in the first question.
What is the expectation on student achievement do we hope to achieve with the additional investments?
So yeah, I would say that, we have our students back there in their first round of MAP testing. So we're going to get the results of that test, and that's going to help us see where kids are. We're constantly, monitoring where they are and adjusting our instruction. But these dollars, these other additional services such as counselors and social workers and those additional services allow students to get kind of the social emotional support so they can focus on the academic achievement. But we have, achievement goals for math and reading, and that these dollars will help contribute to that, to the advancement of those goals.
Yes, and specifically, there are the learning targets. There are that we actually are working with ODE with, but because of the current conditions, although we set initial metrics, we're still going to be in the process of those in conjunction and in partnership with ODE is setting those those achievement targets. And so that is part of the plan, and those are being firmed up. But again, due to the situation of COVID, those have we're in a holding pattern until we kind of mutually agree upon those. But we did submit those draft targets, and I can get you that information as well as the specific number of social workers.
So Director Odell, are you saying that in our we have to provide the not proposal, but whatever you call it, to ODE, explaining our SIA strategies? And so is that what you're referring to in terms of where these specific learning targets are embedded? Or
it's the student metrics, it's student outcomes and metrics. And so that is in the design of the bill to be established in partnership and but realistically, that's ODE and Portland Public offering, this is what we think our targets should be. And Dr. Brown, before he left, was in that, and then they were suspended. So as soon as we know more about the specific metrics, we will absolutely share those.
May I ask if we know that there's going to be learning loss as a result of the pandemic, and we also know we have these targets. Are we kind of recalibrating with the understanding that we're going to experience some learning loss? And then also, do we have anybody specifically focused on minding that gap between Black students and white students?
Chair DePass, that's the key important question here in everything that we do. We've pledged to come to the board and do a full fall assessment breakdown disaggregated by student group so that we all have a very clear understanding of where our students are at, where the gaps are. In turn, we'll be having conversations with our school leaders and their school improvement plans and making sure that we're applying every resource available to addressing those gaps or quote unquote unfinished learning. So that is the meat and potatoes of our work. If we can stay focused, we'd love to dive into that conversation and we look forward to those conversations.
Are there any other questions on the presentation?
I just want to once again say how I'm constantly impressed with our staff. I mean, I think of the list of things we're dealing with right now, from, like the staffing issues, trying to figure out how to support teachers, wanting to make sure we're doing assessments so we can have baselines for the board goals and make sure we're putting resources where it needs so we can do exactly what you just said, Chair DePass, mind that gap between our Black and Native students and our white students. We're looking at, the innovative climate justice policy. We're talking with ODOT and trying to figure out how we move Tubman. We're working on the Center for Black Student Excellence. We're doing the long range facilities plan. There's amazing things happening potentially at the Whitaker site. There is an incredible growth with the fund for PPS that I get to be part of. We've got the Southeast Guiding Coalition, and we know that there's a lot of opinions around that. We're dealing with how do we do COVID safety and the vaccine mandate. I mean, I just think about what is on our staff's plate right now and the way that they constantly have as their North Star our students. And that, we hear from teachers and parents and community members and all sorts of opinions and ideas, and our staff continues to have as their true north what is best for students. And I see that in this, report, the way that we're funding those wraparounds for the students in the wake of trauma of the pandemic, and also continuing to focus on how can we partner with our culturally responsive partners and do things better. So I just want to say thank you to our staff who, I think I was in a listening session with PAT last night, and just hearing the exhaustion and stress from the teachers, it echoes the exhaustion and stress I'm hearing in my job as a pastor from the people in my congregation and from my friends. And I think we're in this interesting time in our community where everyone is just really thin after this crazy 18 months we've all been through. And our staff continue to innovate and do incredible work. And I just want to say thank you.
Thank you, Director Lowry. I would agree. It's a tremendous amount of work. I'm impressed every day at just the amount and level and quality of work, and the 10 o'clock emails and the Sunday conversation. So kudos to the staff. And I know it's hard. Do we have any other comments before we move to the next item? And then Kara, are we able to admit Erica Fuller?
Yes, I was just waiting for this conversation to be done.
So we'll move on now to a resolution to approve the appointment of Metro Policy Advisory Committee member. Erica Fuller is seeking appointment to, excuse me just a second, to the Metro Policy Advisory Committee as an alternate. They are a second generation, to introduce Ms. Fuller, they are a second generation Black Oregonian who's been organizing for almost a decade for education access, reproductive health access, mental health, and transparency through governmental systems. They are currently serving as the vice chair of Centennial School District and the school coordinator for the Oregon Women's Campaign School. The Metro Policy Advisory Committee is made up of 30 voting and non-voting members and their alternates. And school boards in the region must approve the appointment of Metro Policy Advisory Committee members representing a school board. That requires the appointee to go around and speak with every school board in the region in order to get a vote of approval. If you want to dig into this, Article 3, Section 2I on page 4 of the MPAC Metro Policy Advisory Committee bylaws requires that members and alternates from school boards be appointed jointly by the governing bodies of the school districts represented. So that would be in the Tri-County areas. That would include Washington, Multnomah, and Clackamas counties, the school boards therein. I'd like to introduce Vice Chair Centennial Fuller, Vice Chair Centennial District, to speak for herself here. Ms. Fuller, can you hear us, and are you in the meeting?
Yes, I am. Hello,
Hi.
everyone.
Welcome.
Hello. Hi. So I wanted to just come on here to real quickly introduce myself. My name is Erica. Chair DePaz did a wonderful job of introducing me. I am a longtime second generation Oregonian. I was born in Clackamas, but I was raised in Gresham. But I have family all throughout North Portland, Gresham, Vancouver, Washington. Been living here for about 30 years now. I'll be 30 actually on Thursday. So I'm really excited to just have this opportunity to help represent students from all demographics on the Metro Policy Advisory Committee. One of the things that I have noticed during my time just being in the school board, I was elected in May of this year. So one of the things that I have just noticed is that we don't have equitable representation when it comes to Metro and just government, when it comes to wanting to get students not only from, I guess you can say from communities of color, basically. One of the things that I have been just advocating for about a decade is making sure that we had representation so that students of color especially can see that we can do anything that we put our mind to. And so one of the things that I would want it to do just in this position on Metro is to bring not only representation from East County out because we have a lot of folks from the west side. Representation has been on the west side, so like Hillsborough, Tigard, those types of areas. And there hasn't been really much representation from Multnomah, East, particularly from Multnomah, which has a lot of students of color that are out here. That includes Black, Indigenous, Latinx. And so when I noticed that we didn't have that equitable representation, I immediately raised my hand and was like, we need to fix this. Because resources are obviously, as we look at it, unequitable when it comes to different parts of Portland metro area. And I want to make sure that folks don't forget about us, that we're still out here, that we're doing the work, that students need to be represented at all levels. And Metro, I feel, is a #1 way for us to do this, especially now with housing being such a crucial aspect and going through with that. I want to make sure that the housing bond that was passed in Metro in 2018 is actually put to good use, that we're getting it to the folks that have been hurting the most, which is predominantly our students of color and their families. And a lot of folks don't really seem to talk about that during this whole entire COVID thing, is the students and how they've been affected. And so I know I'm preaching to the choir because everybody is hearing this, but I am just ecstatic to have this opportunity to be able to share stories. I plan on going and continuing to have these conversations. I want to make sure that not only am I representing East County, but all of Metro as well too, and making sure that we have figuring out how we can best operate under the current systems that be within the Metro Policy Advisory Committee, and how we can better be assisted through Metro. And so for that, I'll be quiet and I'll take any questions. I am more than welcome to answer anything.
Board, thank you so much, Ms. Fuller. It was great to hear your voice and your commitment. Board members, do we have any questions of Ms. Fuller? Tests? Is there anything we want to know more? I think you did a great job of explaining your commitment to all kids in the region, but particularly advocating for kids east in Multnomah and East County in particular. Do we have any board discussion or questions for Ms. Fuller?
I just want to say thank you for your willingness to serve.
Thank you.
Yeah. One question I always like to ask just like officials in general is kind of like, what is the one thing that you could pinpoint as like most important to students or most important to you to address for students at this time?
That is a very good question. And I think what we first need to do is to open the door of that communication and really ask the students what they want. I don't think that has happened in a very long time. And so, for instance, I'm part of participatory budgeting for Oregon, and we're trying to get youth PB off the ground in East County, which circles around youth of color. And so what we're trying to do is to ask them what they would like to see those American Rescue Dollars plan that we have set aside in East County, and we're trying to get Portland to get on that as well too. But we're trying to figure out what you guys want to do with the money and not trying to throw spaghetti at the wall and seeing if it sticks. Like coming to y'all as the stakeholders, as the community, and really seeing what you want. So what I would say to that is that it's basically about how we're communicating and creating that better transparency and communication between students and school board. I hope that answered your question.
It's a great question. And Ms. Fuller, you're probably closer to having been a student than a lot of us on the board. Are there pardon?
I was about to say, I was like, I actually graduated from Centennial, so I know exactly what you're talking about. Like, I love just the power education can give you. So yes.
Chair the pass, don't speak for me. I just graduated 2 years ago. Hey, Erica, how you doing today?
I'm good. How are you doing?
I am doing great. Question.
Yes.
Why are you doing this to yourself?
Yes, that is a good question. So that is a question that I ask myself a lot. But the reason why I'm doing this is because, like, and this sort of has like a martyr thing to say, and I don't mean it to come from a martyr side or anything like that, but it seems like nobody else is going to step up to the plate. Like, we need representation from Portland, East County. Like, we need that. And in order to make sure that we are getting folks continually in there and seeing what, and I know that, you know, the system, it's not built for us. So I understand that, but it's about, for me, I'm an abolitionist. So I'm about not only disrupting systems, but I'm also about replacing the systems that we are disrupting. And so I want to make sure that we are doing this the smart, right way, so we can help better our future generations, because they have been even I'm speaking from instance, like, we have been wrong for far too long. I'm talking about our generations, like climate change, racism, women reproductive rights, like all those different types of things. And so, and it seems like we have been forgotten about. And so I feel like I'm a good person enough. I know I'm not perfect, but I feel like I'm a good person enough to at least start the conversation and start bringing people through in those doors. Because it's not about me at the end of the day, it's about who I'm bringing in with me. I hope that answered your question.
Chair to pass. If I could just take a moment, thanks. I just want to let folks know I will be abstaining from tonight's vote due to my dual role in the situation. I think, as most people know, I'm both a PPS board member. I'm also the deputy CO at Metro. Well, there is no official conflict of interest, either real or perceived. I think the optics of using the position to vote for someone who's going to be on MPAC, who's going to advise the Metro Council, who may in fact give policy direction in my day job, I don't love those optics. So I will be abstaining, and I want to make it clear it has nothing to do with Ms. Fuller at all, but more my dual roles. So I just wanted to put that on the record. That's
duly noted. And it's there isn't an actual conflict, but it could be an appearance of conflict. And the safe bet is err on the conservative side. I think we're ready to move on in the discussion. Ms. Fuller, I really appreciate you being here, taking the time tonight. I'm sure you had 14 other things to do this evening, but it was great to hear from you. And I trust that should you be appointed, that you'll do a great job for the region.
Thank you.
I think, board, are we ready to vote on, it would be resolution 6400. We will now vote on resolution 6400. All in favor, please indicate by saying yes.
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 Yes. All abstentions. I'm sorry, the script. Are there any abstentions?
Yes, one abstention.
So,
Pass.
yes.
Sorry, did I miss the motion? I don't think I heard a motion put on the table.
I agree.
Forgot.
You made a motion.
Thank you. Do we have a motion and a second to?
I want a motion. I never get to motion anything.
I'll say,
Okay. Do you want me to finish?
Be faster on the drawer, Director Green.
Yeah, you gotta get that. You gotta get that mute button off 2 minutes before you want to move something. So, do we have a motion and a second to move a resolution, approve resolution 6400?
I'll second.
I made the motion. Gary said.
Okay, thank you. So you both lit up at the same time. Again, Chair Lowry, I appreciate you in the moment. It sounds like Director Green moved, Director Holland second, the resolution 6400 to approve Ms. Erica Fuller to serve as an alternate on the Metro Policy Advisory Committee. All those in favor, please indicate by saying yes.
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 Any abstentions?
Yes, one abstention.
And I'm sorry, you guys, I'm struggling tonight. So we've got one all opposed. We have no opposed, one abstention. It sounds resolution 6400 is approved by a vote of 6-0. I'm sorry, 6-0 with 6-0 with one abstention. Student Representative Weinberg unofficially voting.
Yes.
So the motion passes with one abstention and a 6-0. Thank you, Ms. Fuller. And good luck with the rest of your tour around the region.
Thank you. Thank you all so much.
I just want to let board members know that the resolution has been amended to appoint Erica Fuller to the Metro Council. It was updated. The resolution was updated to reflect her position as an alternate and not as a full member. Moving forth, we're going to go through the first readings of the policy rescissions now. Director Brem Edwards, would you like to introduce this next item?
Yes, thank you, Chair DePass. So let me just get going here. Thank you. So the Board Policy Committee met on October 19th, 2021, and as part of the agenda recommended that the board consider a first reading of six current policies for rescission. This year, we're going through a process of reviewing many of our policies and selecting ones that are duplicative, not actual policies, or not reflective of current law or values, or for some reason should not be in our current policies governing the district. For the community, a first reading is an introduction of the policy, a modification of an existing policy, or a rescission or / deletion of a policy. We then have a public comment period for at least 21 days, and then we may have a second reading, which is really an adoption or approval of the new policy, adoption of the changes, or approval of the rescission of the policy. So tonight we have for first readings, they're all rescissions, and I'm just going to briefly describe them. Sorry, let me get my. So the rescissions we have tonight for first reading, policy 3.40.091, traffic safety patrols. This policy was adopted in 1971 and amended in 2002. This policy does not constitute a policy. Then we have policy 4.50.010, student interviews and errands. This policy was adopted in 1971 and amended in 2002. The policy has content that is better reflected in students' rights regarding searches and professional conduct policies, which were recently revised. Third policy for rescission, 4.50.020, health services. This policy was adopted in 1971 and amended in 2002. Instead of this policy, there is longstanding practice that's governed by statute, contracts, and board resolutions. Policy number 4 that we're proposing for rescissions. 4.50.023 dental health services. This policy was adopted in 1971 and amended in 2002. The statutes upon which the policy was based have been repealed, and the policy is not needed for dental clinics. Policy number 5.20.100, physical and mental health of staff members. This policy was adopted in 1971 and amended in 1975. The district does not employ a medical advisor, and there are current practices in place to reflect the intent of this policy. And the last policy recommended for rescission is 6.10.013, career education learning opportunities. And the policy was adopted in 1971, amended in 2002. The district has career education programs. However, this is not a policy. So all of these rescissions were brought forward in coordination with staff, and the committee unanimously recommends that the board consider these policies tonight for first reading and be considered for rescission. Back to you, Chair, to pass.
Thank you. I'm multitasking, obviously. I'm sorry. So we'll have the second reading currently of 3 policies and rescissions of several policy. Director Brim Edwards, can you please introduce each policy before we vote? Just a moment, I'm toggling. So the second reading of policy revisions, would you like to introduce these next items?
Sure. Maybe just before we leave the first reading, I would just mention that all of tonight's policy proposed for rescissions will be posted on the board website, and the public comment period is a minimum of 20 days. Contact information for board comment will be posted with the policy. The board will hold a second reading of the policy at its December 14th meeting, if that's appropriate. So that's for the first reading. So now into the public comment period. The second readings tonight, as I said in the introduction of our first readings, the second reading is really an adoption or approval of a new policy, adoption of the changes of a current policy, or approval of the rescission of a policy. The policies we're about to take action on through the approval or adoption had a first reading 21 days ago and a 21-day public comment period. We had a policy committee meeting on October 29th where there was an opportunity for comment on these 3 policies. We had no comment from the public on these policy changes and the rescissions. In addition, we received no comment through the public comment portal on the proposed policy. So the first of the 3 policies is policy 1.70.020. It is the policy and administrative directives policy. The policy outlines the school board's policy development process, and the revision is essentially moving most of the current administrative directive into the actual policy itself. The committee members unanimously recommended this to the board, and no adverse comments were received during the public comment period. That's the introduction, Chair, to pass, if you want to ask for a motion.
Yes, and are we doing these separately, these next package of 3, or we've got 2 and then 1?
It's my understanding we're going to do the 3 of these individually, and then we're going to do, there's a packet of rescissions that we'll do all at once, but not them individually, because they're not, the rescissions aren't substantive.
Thank you. So if anybody has strong feelings about safety patrol, now would be the time.
Actually, we'll Madam Chair, if we could go through the 3 ones individually, and then do the one big packet at the end, if that's okay, or would you rather do the big packet at the beginning?
No, I think we need to do Plan A and read those. Yes, and then go through the larger packet at the end.
Okay, so the first policy we have before you, I can make a motion that we adopt resolution 6401, which would approve and adopt these policy on administrative, on policies and administrative directives 1.70.020.
Do I have a motion and a second to adopt resolution 6401, resolution to adopt revised policies and administrative directives, policy 1.0.020P?
So moved.
Second.
Director Lowry moves, Director Scott seconds the adoption of resolution 6401. Is there any board discussion? Ms. Bradshaw, is there any public comment?
No.
The board will now vote on resolution 6401, resolution to adopt revised policies and administrative directives, policy 1.70.020P. All in favor, please indicate by saying yes.
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 Yes. All opposed, please indicate by saying no. And are there any abstentions? Resolution 6401 is approved by a vote of 7-0 with Student Representative Weinberg voting.
Yes.
We'll now move to the resolution to liability of employees of the district, policy 5.50.020P. Do I have a motion and a second to adopt resolution 6402, resolution to adopt revised liability of employees of the district, policy 5.50.020P?
So moved.
I'm going to second, and then I'll ask if I can introduce the policy.
Okay, so Director Green moves, Director Brum Edwards seconds, and I'm sorry, do we have board discussion, or would you like to introduce this item?
Thank you. Just to provide an overview for the broader community and everyone else on what we're about ready to vote on or what we're just moving. So this is the proposed amendments to the liability of employees of the district policy. This policy revision provides clarifications and other non-substantive changes to the actual policy. It also adds a limited commitment to represent PPS in-house employee attorneys who face regulatory proceedings if the in-house attorney was acting in the course of their role as an in-house attorney and did not engage in misconduct. It's expected this would have a de minimis financial impact, if any at all, in some years. This is another policy that the committee members unanimously recommend to the board, and no adverse comments received during the public comment period. Thank you for letting me provide the introduction to that.
Thank you for that clarity. Is there any board discussion on resolution 6402? And Ms. Bradshaw, is there any public comment?
No.
The board will now vote on resolution 6402, resolution to adopt revised liability of employees of the district, policy 5.50.020P. All in favor, please indicate by saying yes.
Yes.
Yes. Yes.
All opposed, please indicate by saying no. And are there any abstentions? Resolution 6402 is approved by a vote of 7-0 with Student Representative Weinberg voting.
Yes.
Our third resolution is a resolution to adopt the revised vacation and district holidays for non-representative employees. And I've had a request to move this back to committee.
Can I speak to that request, Madam Chair?
Sure, state your case and then we'll discuss how we'll move this back.
Okay, so I'm going to just provide a short overview so people know what we're talking about. So the third policy is the vacation and district holidays for non-represented employees policy. We currently have 3 policies relating to vacation and holidays. And shortly in the next package of rescissions, we are going to be rescinding 2 of those. So this is a rescind 2 and retain 1. So that the third policy, point 5.60.31, removes the specific details of vacation accrual from the policy and instead creates the process that has a superintendent recommending a vacation policy for non-represented employees that's approved by the board and is posted publicly. This adds transparency and accountability to an important fringe benefit for an employee group that includes our most senior and highest paid employees. We approve the benefits of other employees through our engagement and approval of the contracts for non-represented employees. The committee unanimously recommended this to the board, and there were no adverse comments and no amendments offered by any board members during the public comment period. There was an amendment circulated about within the last hour, and because it wasn't publicly posted and hasn't had an opportunity for the committee to consider it, I'd like to move it back to the committee and ask the director who is proposing it to come and present the amendment to the committee so we can consider it and discuss it. And if the public wants to comment on it, they can.
Director Scott, do you want to speak to your amendment and speak to process if you have anything to say about that?
Hold on. Can I say something, Madam Chair? I think we have to do some processes first. Like, I think we need to first, we have to motion and second the amendment before it can be an amendment happen. I mean, we have to vote and we have to
move
and second, and then before amendment can be placed.
Actually, what I'm suggesting is we move this policy back to committee and have the consideration of the amendment in committee and then bring it back to the board.
Yeah, but go ahead. But I think
I was going to say, I don't support moving the policy back to committee. I think we can make the amendment here at the board.
Director Scott, can you speak to the substance of your amendment, please?
I'm happy to do that, but I think Gary's point may be a good one. I'm going to turn to Liz. What I hear is one board member wanting to refer back to committee. I'm happy to talk about my amendment, but I do think we have to have the motion on the table.
I think there can be a motion to send the policy back to committee. I think that's the most direct route right now. That's what I understood Director Brim-Edwards to be suggesting. We can get there a number of different ways, but I think that's the most direct route. To put a motion on, to have someone make a motion to send the policy and the proposed amendment back to the policy committee. That can be seconded. There can be board discussion that can be voted on, and we can proceed from there.
I for one, do not want to vote on sending it back to committee before I hear from Director Scott about the substance and the reason for his amendment. So I think if we're just gonna,
you'd have discussion. You just get it on the table, and then you would have board discussion, and then you would vote on the motion to send it back to the policy committee.
Or we could do it the other way around, which is to just introduce the amendment, have discussion on the amendment, and then vote on it. Either way.
You'd have to introduce the underlying motion, and then I think the amendment, and then within that, I think the fastest way is to put on the table the motion to send it back, resolve that. If it still remains before the board, we can get to the underlying, the original motion, and then the motion to amend that. But again, we can get there a number of different paths. I think the most straightforward way is to make a motion to send it back to committee and address that first.
Do I have a motion and a second to move resolution 6403, the resolution to adopt the revised vacation and district holidays for non-represented employees, 5.60.031P back to the policy committee?
So moved.
Second.
Director Green moves and Director Brim-Edwards seconds the resolution 6403 to move that back to the policy committee. Is there any board discussion?
Yeah, thanks for helping us work through that process. I don't have strong feelings about whether it goes back to the policy committee or not. I may defer to policy committee members on that. I guess I do want to say just a little bit of a correction to Director Brim-Edwards' statement. I did make statement on the record at the first reading about my concerns about this policy and my desire to see some things change. So I think I heard you say that there were no comments from board members. And I thought my comments at the board meeting publicly fell into that category of comments on the policy.
Yeah, I'm sorry. What I had said is that there were no amendments were offered by any board members. And just as from a committee process standpoint, what we're trying to do as we move a lot of processes and also to be sort of highly transparent is that we are posting all the committee agendas up for board members on the Friday before the Wednesday committee meeting, that everybody has an opportunity to weigh in on it. And during the 21-day public comment period, that if there are substantive changes, which if I understand your amendment, but frankly, I just read it on my phone, so I think I understand what it's doing, but I do think it's substantive, that those should be public. From a process standpoint, I think those should be publicly posted and in a public meeting, have a discussion about it. And I know you haven't been to either one of our policy committee meetings where we discussed it, but we would welcome you coming and bringing it forward, or one of us will advance, if you don't advance the concept that you're proposing, but it seems like it would be better than getting the amendment in the middle of the meeting and trying to sort of process what it means.
So I'm going to jump in here to sort of say again, for future reference, since you're the chair of the policy committee, when a board member makes an official statement at first reading about their opposition to a policy and their desire to see things changed, does that not then count as a public statement that the policy committee can take into consideration? Is there an additional process I need to do for the future? I'm not on the policy committee, so I can't often or even usually attend those meetings. I thought by making my statement last time, I made it clear what I wanted, and I assumed that this came back without changes meant that the policy committee considered it and decided not to make changes. In which case now that's why I propose an amendment.
I guess I would say
I have those first readings in our board meetings to give board members, particularly those who don't serve on the policy committee, the opportunity to weigh in, as you did.
And I think there's nothing wrong with this process of a board member having raised concerns, having had some time to think about it, now bringing an amendment. What this means is, what I think is, instead of sending it back for the policy committee again, I think if it's the will of the board, we can adopt this amendment, and then the policy would go back to a first reading so we can have public engagement around it. So that's the path I would support, rather than sending it back to the policy committee again, which has plenty of work on his plate. This is a correct process that Director Scott is following, where it was raised in a first reading. There was time for people to comment. He has some concerns about it at this moment before he's ready to vote on it at the second reading. So he can make that amendment. If it's the will of the board, we can engage with that and then go back for a first reading. I do not think this needs to go back to the policy, but I would like to have, we're arguing about process, and I would really like to also hear the amendment.
This is just bad governance process to bring something in the middle of the meeting that wasn't posted.
I fundamentally disagree that this is bad governance process. I actually think this is appropriate governance process, and that the way our committees are actually optional. We don't actually have to have committees. We could do this policy work as the will of the board. That's a way we choose to organize ourselves. And I think because Director Scott is not on the policy committee, there's nothing actually wrong about the way this process is happening.
I have to say also that, so Director Scott brought up his concerns at our policy committee meeting, and what he's seeing tonight doesn't reflect his input. And so that's the reason I'm trying to get this moved back to the committee so we can discuss it publicly then, and come to a resolution on this. At that time, we would bring it back for to the board.
But that's an unnecessary step. We can just amend it since it's already been raised, and then it's publicly posted and it's available as as an amended first reading for that public process. I mean, otherwise we're just adding an unnecessary step.
That's not true.
Before we go on, Director Scott, would you? So we have a motion on the table, but Director Scott, do you want to state your case?
Sure. Yeah. No, I'm happy to. So the amendment is relatively straightforward. Let me.
No, Director Scott, hold on a second. We have to address the motion on the table at hand. So we have to address if we're going to move this back or not. If we need to vote on that, it needs to vote, but we have to only address the motion at hand.
But I believe that Director Constam asked to hear the substance of the motion before she decides if she wants to vote to send it back, that she
Right.
needed
But
that
the,
information to make
yeah, but the motion that went forward on the table is the only motion we should be discussing. You can talk with Ask Liz. The only motion that was brought up is the motion to send it back. So unfortunately, that's what we have to either vote on to move it back or do whatever, but that has to get off the table before we can move on to what the amendment is.
I think that's right.
According to Robert Rules of Order.
I think that's right, Director Hollins. I do think that Director Scott can, because the board has just received this in the middle of the meeting, and I'm not sure who has read it, he can describe in summary fashion in service of the motion on the table what the amendment is. That may weigh on directors' vote on whether to send it back to the policy committee or not. I think debating the merits of the amendment itself comes in a subsequent motion and discussion, but right now I do think he gets to offer some explanation or summary of what it is in furtherance of the motion on the table.
Director Scott, are you willing to provide a brief summary?
Sure, I'll be
the amendment.
If we move on to that, I can be more substantive in a few minutes. But no, I do appreciate the process. I do think it's important. So yes, what the amendment is attempting to address is the question for me about the appropriate division between our policy role as a board versus operations role for the superintendent. And the policy as it's written, as it came forward, it essentially directs the superintendent to develop a vacation accrual schedule that will be approved by the Board of Education in the form of a resolution, and it also requires any modifications to be approved. The amendment simply takes out that approval, so it directs the superintendent to develop the vacation accrual schedule, directs the superintendent to include an annual limit on accrued vacation that be carried forward, and directs that the schedule be posted on the district website. But it does remove the Board of Education approval of that. And I'm going to stop there. I can talk more about the substance and why I think that, but given where we are, I'm going to stop there in terms of that's the event.
Thank you for that. So it's one key component, and that is removing the Board of Education having to approve the vacation accrual and schedule. So we have a motion on the table to move this resolution back to the policy committee. Do I have a motion and a second to move this back to policy committee?
You already have that, Chair, so you just can call for a vote now.
So thank you. We'll call for a vote now. So we have a motion and a second on the table. We have a motion on the table, and I'm sorry, I didn't note if we had a second or not.
I made the motion because I'm making motions tonight.
We do have a motion and a second. So
and Julia was the second. So, but I'm making motions tonight.
Okay. Well,
I got a couple more.
Keep on rocking it, Director Green.
I didn't tell him when we started that everybody has a 25-word limit tonight, and that he already read that resolution, so he's about at 2,000.
Chair to pass. I'd like to speak to the motion.
Thank you.
So one thing I would highlight is that when we had our retreat with Ben Kleben, one of the pieces that we didn't actually get to, but was in his slide deck, was that board members believe that our committee process and our structure is productive and saves time and furthers the work. And our staff response was only like 20%. Did they agree with that? So I think as we think about sending this back and some of those pieces we create of our own process, there is nothing actually in process or in our rules that says we have to send this back to the committee. In fact, because Director Scott is the one that is speaking to this and has raised that, and because of his schedule, I would rather have us discuss this with him present, and so would argue for not sending it back to committee. This is work we can do here publicly in front of everyone. We could, if we do choose to go with the amendment, then it would go out for a first reading again. So there would be public ability to interact with this policy. So that's why I would say we need to do this here and now tonight, and I would not be in favor of sending it back to committee.
I'd like to speak to that specific point about the committee's work. This year, we shortened the committee by an hour, and I think just given by tonight's agendas is a reflection of the productivity and the good working relationship we have with staff of trying to move items that are both of important to staff, but also to our community. And I think the committee has already produced a lot of, and it's also our most diverse committee, and we've had lots of engagement by our student representative. I don't think we should get in a process of like saying the committees aren't worthwhile, because I think that's not been the case at all. And we've had good opportunities to discuss in depth, but also and take in differing points of view. And for efficiency's sake, like I say, I'm happy to raise that in the next committee meeting. And Director Scott, you're more than welcome to come, or we can have your point of view represented and considered as well. So I don't think this is a burden on the committee, nor a reflection of some sort of ineffectiveness of the committee's work. As I said, all these came out of committee unanimously, and also with staff support.
I'm going to call it then, and I agree with Director Lowry that if we can handle this tonight and put it back out for public comment, I would suggest that as a path, particularly since we were asked about 4 weeks ago to minimize anything that required extra time on staff, and that we're in a moment where we don't have the capacity to keep going back. I'm just not sure how to take the motion that we have on the table. We could vote on it, and then do we make a new motion to?
Yes, we need to vote on this. And sorry, go ahead, Liz.
I think you are exactly right. Need to vote on this motion. If the motion carries, then we're done, and it goes back for this policy, and it goes back to the policy committee. If it fails, then we can introduce the motion to approve the policy as first read. And within that, there'll be a motion to amend, I think is the sequence.
Okay.
Madam Chair.
Yes.
I just want to comment on the motion. Only reason why I would suggest to go back to the committee is, one, I haven't seen it yet, and I don't know what staff thoughts is about the amendment. That's the only reason why I would send it back at this time.
Would you be comfortable if we get this motion on the table and we heard, I mean, we need to do the vote first, right? Are there any other comments before we put this to a vote? I think that's the best way for us to move our work.
The only thing I'll say is honestly, I thought this was like a really straightforward amendment that would take 5 minutes for an up or down vote. I haven't, I made my comments last time. And so all I'll say is I am in interest of moving this forward quickly tonight, and either the board supports it or we don't. I'm surprised we've taken this long already to talk about it.
Yeah, I guess.
I'm going to vote not to refer back to committee just so we can address it and move on. So.
And I'm not supportive either. And I just want to make sure that Director Hollins understands that you would have an opportunity now to read the policy. It's pretty straightforward.
Yeah, but I don't feel like we've had the chance to go through it with the students. I don't feel like we've had a chance to go through it with the staff. And I would have sent it back. Not that I'm opposed to it. But I still feel like it should have went back so that we could, so that we can digest it, so that we can truly understand all the pieces that are into it, and then make a decision from there. And I do know that he said something, so I'm not saying that this isn't to say that he didn't say anything, but I didn't get from it, and maybe I doze off at times. So maybe I missed it. I didn't get the substance of what he was saying, and instead of this, do this. And I feel like there should have been in that committee, and I am on it. We should have had a lot more time to talk about it. So I would have voted to send it back so that we can talk about it. But I also understand his schedule, working at Metro, and my wife used to work for Metro, and they're slave drivers down there. And so I understand that, he probably doesn't have as much free time as us free reigning pastors do, who get to just walk around the city and, shake hands and kiss babies all day.
We only work on Sundays, right?
Yeah, that's all we do. So, but I understand that too. But my vote would have been to send it back so that I can hear it, and maybe even either Zoom him in or have a lunch with him where he can tell me about it. And then I stand up on the table and say, this is what he wants until he gets it. I have no problem doing that either, because Andrew is my guy. And, we haven't had dinner together yet, but it's cool. We had, group meetings, but that's it. I'm gonna stop talking now.
As a committee chair, I guess one thing I want to say is, Director Scott, I appreciate that you said something, and I would like to commit to all the board members that, as we approach to, and I started it today and then my computer broke and I didn't get through my calls, but to connect with all board members when we're getting ready for a second reading, so that if you do have, if you're not on the committee, I think the people on the committee, we have 4 people on the committee, but if you're not on the committee, that we have an opportunity to hear if you want to make some amendments so that we can get those posted and considered. So I, just going forward, a lesson learned for me, Director Scott, I appreciate that you did say something. I didn't hear it as an amendment. And so just going forward, that will be something I will do, because I do think it's important that, amendments, that especially the ones that are substantive, we get posted, and, the public has a right to see them, and everybody else, and we can get input so we don't have unintended consequences. So, I pledge to, going forward, if that's the case, that people want to amend them when we get to the second reading, that I'll give people the opportunity. And I guess everybody now is on notice that it would be great in our board packets to have amendments so that everything's all posted. But I appreciate, Director Scott, your indicating that you weren't happy, that you weren't supportive of the general direction, and that I'll be explicit in asking next time if you or anybody else has amendments to policies.
Thank you. And we still need to put it to a vote. And I appreciate everybody here willingness to fall forward and to learn in public, and your values and ideals are showing up, whether we're fully transparent. Also, in a perfect world, we would get everything a week in advance, and we're not living in a perfect world. So please have grace with everybody. Understand everybody has commitments and multiple other roles in the community and within their families. We're going to put this on the table for a vote to move Resolution 6403 back to the committee. All those in favor, please indicate by saying yes.
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 I heard 2 yeses. All those opposed, say please indicate by saying no.
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 No. I'm missing a vote.
There were 3.
I think
yeses.
Julia didn't vote, so you have three.
I did vote. I did vote. It was Dr. Green, Director Hollins, and myself.
Voting to move back to the committee, and I heard Director Lowry, I heard Director Scott, Director Constam.
I am a no.
And I am a no as well. So that motion does not pass. That motion does not pass.
Do you want to ask the student rep?
Student representative, what is your unofficial vote?
Yes.
Thank you. Thank you for that reminder, Director Brum Edwards. The
Chair
motion,
to pass, I'll go ahead and make a motion to put this policy on the table. I think that's our next step.
the next step is to say it does not pass. That is that the resolution is not moving back to the policy committee. Saw somebody being a dad. Is there a motion to introduce the amendment?
Actually, I think it's a
We have
motion
to get the
policy on the table. So I'll make a motion to put the policy on the table.
In the spirit of collegiality, I'll second that.
Way to demonstrate teamwork. So we have a motion on the table to, I'm sorry, Director Scott, can you repeat your motion?
It's a motion to adopt the policy 5.60.031.
Resolution 6403.
Thank you. That's easier.
Resolution
Yes.
6403. Okay. So, and we have a second. Is there any board discussion?
So I would like to, as part of the discussion around this, to introduce an amendment. And I think I got to explain my amendment before it. I'm making a motion for amendment, but I think I got to explain it before a second. Is that right, Liz? Or
I think we've had enough. If you want to get it on the table, I think we know where we're headed. So
anyway, the amendment, just again to recap, it's really focused around it strikes board approval of the vacation accrual schedule and board approval of any modifications to that schedule. And just to give a little bit more background as to why, one of the things that we talk a lot about is the appropriate role between setting policy and operations. And in my mind, the policy here is really clear. And I think actually what's written here is really good. We are directing the superintendent to develop a vacation accrual schedule that's applicable to non-represented employees. We're directing the superintendent to include an annual limit on the amount of vacation that be carried forward. And we're directing the district and superintendent to publish that schedule on the district website. And in my mind, that's the appropriate policy level that we should be engaging in. What troubles me about board approval of the vacation schedule is that it means that any changes to that schedule will also need to be approved by the board. And it's very clear the modifications. That to me gets into very much an operational issue. And what I'm mostly concerned about, or frankly, I'll say really bluntly, I'm not sure that the board has the appropriate knowledge of HR policy to decide what is an appropriate level of vacation accrual or not. For instance, whether we offer our 5-year employees 3 years or our 10-year employees, 3 weeks, or 10-year employees 4 weeks, 20-year employees 5 weeks, whatever that is. That to me, those are the types of decisions that the superintendent, in consultation with his HR director, in consultation and looking at other districts in Oregon and around the country, need to be able to look at. I'm going to give an example. At Metro, we have a vacation schedule. It is approved by the chief operating officer, not by our Metro council. Coming out of the pandemic, we had a number of employees who did not take very much vacation at all. This is, endemic. Throughout the whole country, people experience this in all different sectors. And as a result, we had people who were pushing up against that accrual schedule and going to lose huge amounts of vacation because they weren't able to take it. We made an operational decision to increase those caps as well as increase the overall, some of the accruals as well, in combination with some other pay changes we were making. And I think that's the appropriate level from an operational perspective that people who run governments or school districts should be able to make. What I worry about is any of these decisions coming back to the board, they seem to me that they'll be inherently political. Because when I think about what will a board add in terms of value to that decision, well, it's going to be a question of, well, do we think that employees should get 5 weeks, or should they get 4 weeks or 3 weeks? And again, I'm going to go back to what I said, and I don't mean to criticize any of my fellow board members. I love you all and I have great respect for you, but I'm not sure any of us are HR experts. And I'm not sure any of us sort of have the ability to look out there in the market and say, right now, we need to make some changes, or look internally to our own employees and say, we need to make some changes in order to do that. When it comes to overall accountability, because I did hear this comment when I talked about my potential changes at the first reading, and I think there were some responses around the fact that, well, how do we keep, how do we sort of maintain the accountability? I think that comes back to, the superintendent is accountable to us. And I think that for me is the check. If all of a sudden the superintendent, and again, it would be very public, very transparent because it would be posted on the website, increased vacation to 8 weeks or 10 weeks or 12 weeks, it would be our job as a board to then start asking more questions and to potentially, start talking about, well, wait, why are you doing this? And that would show up in our evaluation of the superintendent. That's what I feel like is the appropriate board role. And with that, again, I made some of these comments at the first reading. I haven't talked to anyone since. If the board agrees with me, I would love to see y'all adopt this amendment. And if you don't, then I think we shouldn't, and we can move on. But I actually think we shouldn't spend a whole lot more time talking about this. And I do appreciate Director Lowry's point that, if you do adopt the amendment, it goes back to first reading. There's time for additional public comment, engagement with students, et cetera, over the next 21 days.
And then at the next board meeting, when we bring it back for a second reading, someone else can make amendment and we can do this all over again.
And I was reminded that this conversation is not necessarily student focused, and we spent an inordinate amount of time at this meeting on this one issue. I appreciate everybody's input and attention, and also just want to state this is also, I feel, clearly in an organizational bucket and not in a governance bucket, and that we've hired the superintendent, who is a professional, to do just this type of work with the people that he has hired and trusts to work, the professionals. I've never personally run a school district, so I can't speak to all the ins and outs. I do know that this is squarely out of my lane, the issue of vacation schedules. I have no expertise whatsoever in it.
So Chair to pass, I think before there's much more discussion and debate among the board, we should get a motion to amend on the table, which sits inside the motion that's already pending, and a second, and then board discussion.
So I'll make the motion.
Bring forward. Do I have a motion?
From a process standpoint, this isn't even, is this posted? I mean, so is there ability to post it on our public sites so that the public can see what we're talking about?
So the public can see what we're talking about because I've just raised it and talked about it. And I just,
no, I mean, just the actual,
I'm not done talking. I want to be really clear that at any governance meeting, we can make amendments, and that's a completely appropriate and legitimate way to do it. So that is what I have brought forward today.
I'm just asking that it be posted on our website along with the other board materials, so that it's publicly posted as we do with everything else.
We'll make sure that it's publicly posted, and we'll, this meeting is archived and will be available online. It'll also be the minutes will also be posted. Do I have a motion on the table to approve the amendment to the resolution?
So moved.
Second.
Director Lowry moves, Director Constam seconds the amendment to resolution 6403. I'm not sure process-wise, do we need to move
for board discussion on the amendment and then vote on the amendment?
Do we have any board discussion, additional board discussion that has not already been exhausted on the amendment?
Because I haven't exhausted anything. I'm just getting started. I don't know about.
You're on a word count.
So I had a couple questions around it. One, the original rule that was in place, why was it put there? So why did we have the original rule? That's question number one. And then I have because from the response of question number one is going to determine where I take the next one. Again, I've said this before. I'll say it openly. I'll say it everywhere. I ain't got no beefs with my guy, Guadalupe. That's my guy. We sit next to each other in all the meetings.
Excuse me, Director Green. I thought Director Scott was your guy.
All y'all my guy. It's my guy. I'm a mutual lover of everyone. I just love one person more than everybody else. That's all. That's all. But should he decide to get my concern, and I felt like the reason that I wanted to know, like, there needs to be stop gaps, is not to try to tell him what he can and shouldn't be doing, but so that there are margins wherewith we can know that he's going to stay within. The idea of simply saying, well, we're going to watch someone and then if they do something, then we'll be able to see it. And then we can ask questions around, why did you do that? Puts us in a position where we're consistently being reactive to situations versus being proactive. So in my mind, the proactive position is to say, there are going to be parameters where which you're going to stay within. And then if somebody needs to go outside of that, then, we can talk about it. But that's what I'm looking to hear. Where are the parameters, where are the margins, and why did the rule get put in place at first? And I said it in the last board meeting, I'm gonna say again, the reason that they don't make the Red Bull commercials that says Red Bulls will give you wings is because somebody believed it and jumped and said Red Bulls didn't give me wings, and then they sued Red Bull and they got paid from it. So I don't want to put us in a position as to where we're responding to a bad situation and we're waiting for something bad to happen and Guadalupe to give his friend, you know what I'm saying, 25 weeks of vacation time. And then all of a sudden we say, oh, that's a bad thing. You shouldn't do that. Why'd you do it? So that's my thought.
So Director Green, I'd like to answer your question about why we even have this policy in front of us. So there was a question when we were having a discussion about the superintendent's contract about mirroring in his contract what the vacation days were for non-representative employees. And when we looked at like, what is that? It turned out we have two policies that say two different things. And we have two policies that actually are way too detailed. And so, and it turns out the district's not following either one of those policies. There's a separate practice that is being used. There's not even the two policies. So the district's out of compliance with the current vacation policies. And so, and we're looking at it, it's like, it's way too detailed. To Director Scott's point, if you wanted to make a change, you'd have to go through this whole policy-making process. If you want to say people who have 4 years in the district get X number of days, and next year you wanted to make it something different, you'd have to go through that process. So what we tried to do in committee is remove all the details, give that back to the superintendent, but still have sort of two pieces retained from the policy, which is really the transparency and also the accountability. So that there is some check in the system for, just on the benefits given, just like there is on a whole host of other things. So that was the reason why this policy is even before us, because we're trying to actually create a policy that works for the district staff. And again, not telling the superintendent, here's the number of days that we think is appropriate for, staff who have been here for 8 years or 15 years. But providing a flexibility, like a scaffolding, so there's flexibility in a framework, but ultimately there's accountability and transparency. So that's why we have this here. And then, like I said, in the next package of rescissions, we're actually rescinding one of the policies that was duplicative and conflicting. And then we're also eliminating the holiday piece, and then they merged this back together.
Has the policy ever been abused?
I don't know. I mean, we're not following the current policy, right? The current policy is not being followed right now. I mean, this is the thing about having it, voted on and posted, just like a number of other things, like for example, the contracts that we have with our other employee groups with all their fringe benefits. It's posted, we know what it is, the board votes on it. So you have transparency and accountability. It's just a question of whether the board, because I think Director Scott's amendment retains the transparency. It's just removing, and we all may have different perspectives. From my perspective, it's removing sort of an accountability measure, but there can be different interpretations.
I can offer just a little bit of additional facts, Director Green, to your question. I mean, these policies on vacation go back long before any current staff was here, so I can only speak for the last 4 years. In 2016 and 17, in that range, again, before this administration was here, the practices that are currently in place were adopted, and those have been posted. And Director Brim-Edwards is correct. They don't align with either of the policies. They're not too far off in terms of how much time you get. So I don't think that qualifies as abuse. It qualifies as adherence to the policy. I'm not aware in my 4 years here of any time that there's been an individual abuse of that policy or granting of it. But I also think that's an anecdotal response based on a limited window of time that most of the senior staff shares or has less than. And I don't know if Sharon Reese is in the green room, There she is. That's who actually you want to hear from. So I'm going to sit quietly.
Okay, there we go. I was struggling to unmute. So I'm playing a little bit of catch up, so I apologize for that. It's my understanding the question is, has the vacation policy ever been abused? Is that correct? Is that the nature of the question? We are very consistently, I believe the answer is no, in the time I've been here since 2017. So we have a published vacation schedule, and we have different benefits available through our CBAs for our represented employees, and those are followed very consistently, and there haven't been special deals made with people that are outside of that. As a result of the pandemic, we did extend a period of time where people could use their vacation because they were unable to use their vacation. So we have made thoughtful exceptions that apply to an entire group of people with review by leadership, but we haven't done sweetheart deals or those sorts of things that you might see in what I would consider an abuse. So we are consistent with our published vacation schedule.
And I think it's good evening, directors. And I think it's also important to note that even though we are out of compliance, as Director Brim Edwards indicates, we have full transparency and have posted everything that we our schedule. So I just want to make sure that that's in the record and make sure that you all know that as well.
So I just have a quick question, and is for me hearing from the staff that it benefits from it one way or the other kind of brings me a little pause. But the other thing for me is, I think for me it's more of an issue of if we're, and then when I heard that we're not following the policy, and this is, I've been hearing this constantly, I've been hearing this a couple of times before of the district is doing stuff and not necessarily following policy. And so I guess I go back to that. Why are we not enforcing the policies that we have in place?
I can share from my perspective that Human Resources conducted a review of the personnel policies and administrative directives because they are inconsistent, they're messy, some of them are very old and outdated, some of them have been have had, whether it's resolution or CBA language that has overcome a written policy or a written administrative directive. So they are messy for all of those reasons. And we conducted a review and made recommendations about, here are a list of outdated policies. So to me, that there is a cleanup that we are in the process, and the policy committee has been doing of reviewing those outdated policies. So that is why.
Yeah, I want to thank Chief Reese for mentioning that, because this was crafted in concert with staff. In fact, the staff report has the last sentence is staff recommends approval of the revised policy. So there wasn't something that we did to staff. It was cooperatively worked through with staff. It came to the committee. And that doesn't mean they can't support something else, but it wasn't, this isn't a policy that's coming out, and it was to address the, let's get rid of the duplicative policies. And it was really in the spirit of like improving our policy making. Again, I think the whole precisions is part of that as well. So we don't have duplicative things, but this wasn't something that staff, staff recommends that the board approve the policy as it came out of the committee.
Great. So I feel like this conversation has gone very far afield. I just want to sort of, I actually want to call the question, Chair to pass. And for me, this is very simple. The policy on the table is an improvement over the other policies that we had that actually staff have been working through with this administrative review to clean up. I think that makes a lot of sense. I think there's an additional improvement we can make, that's the amendment I brought forward. I honestly, I'm a little troubled that we've spent as much time on this. If the board doesn't support, and for me, the question is very simple. Do we trust the superintendent to make the right decisions when it comes to a vacation accrual, or do we as a board want to have the opportunity to second guess that decision and potentially make changes? That's really what it is. And if this board wants that opportunity, then I think you should reject my amendment and adopt the policy as is. If we trust the superintendent and we want to split policy and operations, then I think you should adopt the amendment and then we can adopt the policy. And Chair DePass, if I may, can I call the question so we can move on and get out of here? Because this isn't about student achievement and I think it's gone on too long.
Absolutely. So right now we've got a motion on a table to adopt the amendment to resolution 6403. And I want to call a vote on that. All those in favor of amending resolution 643, please indicate by saying yes.
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 Yes. All those opposed, please indicate by saying no.
No.
I might need help monitoring. I heard 3 yeses and 1 no. Any abstentions?
I'm an abstention because to me, this isn't a matter of do I trust him? I don't have enough information. I don't feel comfortable. And it's not about my trust of Guadalupe to, is he going to do the right thing? It's about, for me, ensuring that there's a process in place that says for certain he's going to do the right thing. It's the choice is removed. It's just like you've got a policy. Policies guide the ship. So I just don't have enough. It's not about whether or not I trust him or don't trust him. I need more. And I thought that one of us having this put it on the floor, whatever, was so that we could talk about it. And in my opinion, we knew once they said, we're gonna talk about it, that this was going to go on. That's why I was saying it needed to go back to the policy committee so that we could have that go on time without it seem like it's running on. I mean, I feel like we knew that I knew it was going to happen. I knew it was going to be a long time. And so, I mean, it doesn't shock me, but I don't want anyone to feel like this is trust. So this is about, I need more. And I'm not just going to vote yes or no without understanding it more. And so I'm gonna pull a Director Andrew and abstain.
I'm gonna follow that as well. I'm gonna abstain when I haven't seen the new what it looks like. So if it does pass, we'll be able to see it through another first reading. So I'm gonna abstain at this point.
It sounds like we have 3 in favor.
I think it was 4 in favor, Director.
4 in favor, 1 no, and 2 abstentions. I'm sorry, I'm multitasking as usual.
That's what we heard, yes.
Is that what we heard? So the amendment passes 4 in favor of adopting that amendment. I believe we have one
student representative.
Thank you. Student Representative Weinberg, your unofficial vote is?
I'm gonna vote no. And for me, it's not about like distrusting Guadalupe at all. It's about making sure that there are some amount of accountability for the school board to check that. And it's not about Guadalupe. It's about any prospective superintendent after Guadalupe, because this policy isn't going to change when, Superintendent Guerrero leaves. I mean, we're planning for this policy to stay. So like painting it as you're either in support of Superintendent Guerrero or not for this, I feel like it's kind of a misnomer for me.
Thank you for your comments.
Fair to pass. I've not wanted to chime in because I didn't want to extend the conversation any further than it needed to, which is probably why you didn't see a lot of staff input on this, because there's no need to make it a bigger issue than it is. But for those that are listening, so they're clear on what we're talking about here, just to put this in really simple terms, a non-represented staff accrues 14 hours a month generally in vacation time. That's 2 days. And so what we're talking about in this proposed 6-sentence policy with the amendment to remove one of them is that we'll transparently publish that non-represented staff who have always followed the rules and the standard process for a 12-month employee, they'll have a certain amount of time by which we expect them to take some vacation. That's all we're talking about here. So you're directing the superintendent to develop a vacation accrual policy, to publish that, to make it transparent. I understand the need to develop policies that are timeless, but you're certainly trusting the superintendent with $750 million. How much time do we want to spend on this?
Thank you for your input. The motion to approve the amendment passes 4-3 with 2 abstentions.
And Chair, at that point, because it's a substantive,
I think it's 4-1 with 2 abstentions.
4-1-1.
4-1,
4-1,
2. Yes, and the student representative has an unofficial vote, but your voice is loud and meaningful.
I didn't mean to cut off that Director Brem Edwards or Chair DePass. Now that the amendment has passed and it is a substantive amendment, as we've been talking about this evening, this goes back to a first reading. So there isn't a need to vote on 6403 as amended at this time, because there's a 21-day public comment period required for a substantive amendment, unless the board determines that it is not a substantive amendment. But I don't think that's, I don't advise you on that. It goes back to first reading.
Goes back to first reading. Okay, I appreciate that. Yes, please go ahead, Director Scott.
No, I was going to make a motion to introduce the resolution 6404, which I think is next on our
It's
list.
next and last.
Actually, we have the rescissions, don't we? Or is that what you're moving?
We're moving the rescissions.
Yep.
Okay. Well, this is something that Director Scott and I are in violent agreement about. So at the last committee meeting, we had policy committee meeting through discussions with staff. We have a list of more policies that we're going to rescind. We're recommending to the board for that have been recommended to the board for rescissions, and so tonight's vote, and we're going to vote on them as a package. There are 7 policies that we're going to rescind. They were out for public comment for 21 days. There was we raised it in the policy committee. There was no public comment. There was no comment by committee members on any of these rescissions. I'm not going to go through them again. They range from the concept of administration to visitors to buildings to certification. And the committee recommended, was unanimous in its recommendation, also with the student rep in support, and staff supports it as well. So in seconding Director Scott's motion, I hope this is a quick agenda item.
And it sounds like we have a motion and a second to adopt resolution 6404, the resolution to rescind board policies 2.10.020P, concept of administration, 3.10.020P, additional building administration personnel, 3.30.050P, visitors to schools, 5.20.020P, certification, 5.30.010P, substitute teachers, 5.70.052P, work year, vacations, and 5.50.064P, religious holidays and teachers. I already have a motion from Director Scott and a second from Director Brem Edwards to adopt resolution 6404. Is there any board discussion? Ms. Bradshaw, is there any public comment?
No.
Seeing that there is none, the board will now vote on resolution 6404, resolution to rescind board policies. All in favor, please indicate by saying yes.
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 All those opposed, please indicate by saying no. Are there any abstentions? Resolution 6404 is approved by a vote of 7-0 with Student Representative Weinberg voting.
Yes.
Thank you. Is there any other business for the good of the order? The next regular meeting of the board will be held on November 16th at 6 o'clock, and this meeting is adjourned.